Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Evangelion Rewatch podcast. I know it's called You Cannot Rewatch, but it's just easier to say Evangelion Rebuild podcast.
Makes more sense.
Yeah. Once again, I'm David,
I'm Dylan.
and thanks for joining us. I wanted to say, I don't think anybody was probably confused by this, but just in case somebody was, this is called episode 3, even though it's the second podcast we've released, because we're talking about episode 3 of the show. We talked about episodes 1 and 2 last time. So I just wanted the podcast episode to match the episode of the show we were watching, even though this is only actually the second podcast. So
I'll be honest, I was confused at first.
yeah, it'd be weird if we were saying this is the second podcast, but we're talking about the third episode. And
Yeah.
then if we didn't fix it now, every episode would be like that for the rest of the show, and it'd be very
Right.
confusing for I think anybody trying to find which episode we were talking about.
Makes sense.
That being said, if you haven't watched this before, this is a rewatch podcast, so make sure that you have rewatched the show, just episode 3 for this. But you probably should have watched the show entirely at least once. It's a rewatch, so not watch for the first time, because we will spoil stuff, most likely. We're not going to try too hard, but it's just better, and you're not really going to understand some of the stuff we talk about if you haven't seen the show all the way through. So as long as you've seen the show all the way through and you've rewatched episode 3, you're good to listen to this and whatever. So other than that, we got all our introduction stuff out of the way last week, so we can pretty much get right into the episode.
Let's do it.
So Dylan, what did you think about episode 3?
Rewatching this and then not watching them consecutively after another, I forgot how short these episodes can be and stuff. Because as soon as it ended like it did, I was like, oh crap, I thought all that stuff happened in this episode.
Oh,
So
yeah?
It was really weird, yeah. But
What stuff?
like when Toji has the phone and stuff like that, and then
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, I think it skips going, and then it just ends like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it does. But I was surprised rewatching it. I think I get surprised by this every time I watch the show. But they managed to get a lot into an episode.
Yeah, I didn't realize all that happened in one episode.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily have just an angel fight fill a whole episode, but
Yeah.
it's not. The angel fight was like maybe 5 minutes, if that. I wasn't actually keeping track, but it wasn't very long, and there was a lot of other stuff happened. I mean, we introduced 2 whole new characters, Toji and Kinsuke.
Yep, that's his name.
And I mean, the class rep too, I guess, if you want to count her. I don't really, count her.
Her dub voice is like so bad. Like
It is really bad, yeah. I don't really think Toji's dub voice is very good either.
Toji's is okay. The other guy's is like a god.
Kinsuke's is bad, but
Kinsuke's so bad.
but his voice is annoying in
Yeah,
the
that's what. Same thing with
Japanese,
the cat. Same thing with the rep. I think the rep's supposed to be really annoying as well.
too. Yeah.
Like real snooty.
I think Toji's voice gets better, but I think the first couple episodes it's a little weird because he just it's like there's a whine in the back of his voice.
Oh,
every
yeah,
line he
yeah.
says.
Yeah.
What do you think about these characters though? Just overall.
I like Toji's character a lot. I've always kind of liked him. I think he gets kind of cool. The other characters I just really I couldn't care less about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought too much about these characters before, just because usually when I watch Eva, I'm focused on the major characters.
Right.
But when I was rewatching just this episode, I was thinking more about these two, particularly not the class rep, but particularly Toji and Kinsuke.
Yeah.
And kind of thinking about their roles in the show and where they go and stuff. And yeah, I don't really know how I feel about him. I like Toji's character in a way because it does have a kind of a cool story. He's really the only person in the show that we see is a victim of a
Well, that's what I think
angel fight.
I think both those characters kind of represent like
The common people?
two sides of the common people that you really, instead of like showing a bunch of people, it's like you get Toji, who's sister's a victim of it, and then you have the other guy who's like super obsessed with the war and like always being like what he sees it as like more as a bystander rather than someone who's actually involved in the war like the other characters are.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that probably definitely is the role, as kind of the human effect of it rather than the pilots and nerve employees. I just think, based on I don't want to get too much into where these characters go, because if we talk about them now, we won't be able to talk about them later. But I just don't know. They just don't seem to end up being that important. I guess Toji does in a way because of what happens with him, but I don't know. It just seems like every other character in the show ends up being so psychologically deep and interesting. Even the characters we see little about, like Gendo, like we don't know much about him throughout the whole show, but he ends up being one of the most interesting characters, especially when you rewatch it. But these two guys, even on rewatching it, there's not a lot there. There's some there to Toji, but it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of to think about. You pretty much get his character.
Yeah.
Even though it is a little deeper than Kinsuke's, but it's just kind of interesting because I think the other characters are usually so well developed and there's so much to them. So, but maybe I'll feel differently as we go on since I'm paying more attention to these characters.
Yeah,
now.
that's true.
Because I remember I wanted to wait to talk about this a little bit, but the first time I watched Asuka's character, when I watched the show for the first time, I hated it. Hated the character.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't until later that I realized how much there was there. So maybe if I pay more attention to these two, I'll find more that I like.
I kind of want to pay more attention to Rei too because I feel like everybody always loves Rei, and I can't tell if it's because like she's supposed to fit this certain like waifu thingy or whatever, or if she's really that interesting of a character.
Yeah, that's a good question because there is definitely sort of an obsession with Rei.
Yeah, and I just never gotten it.
I've watched the show a bunch, so I've paid a lot of attention to the main three pilots.
Right.
And I do think Rei's character is cool and interesting, and I think that she has a cool story, especially by the end and with what happens at the end of Evangelion. But I still don't understand the obsession over it. I think that there's more interesting characters on this show.
Exactly, I completely agree.
Yeah, so I think she's interesting based on the kind of character that she is. But yeah, I don't really understand all the hype for her.
And we probably just pissed off a bunch of people.
Whatever. All right, so another thing that's cool about this episode, again, this episode covers a lot, is we start to learn a lot of the rules of Evangelions, how they work.
Right.
We have that training sequence at the beginning, which is cool because we kind of get an idea of what it's like to train the pilots because we don't really see that a lot in the show. But we learned that the Evas are running on a battery system, and they have to have big plugs inserted into them.
Right. It kind of shows like they have advanced weapons and stuff like that, but like they're still limited.
Yeah. So obviously during Second Impact, Duracell just got fucked.
Yeah, real bad.
They're not around anymore.
Not around anymore.
Yeah, I always thought that was kind of an interesting mechanic, just because it just seems to me like that's purely added to put tension into fights.
Yeah.
I don't really see any other reason to add the whole battery limit thing than to make it so that you can have dramatic scenes during fights where they're like, oh no, only 20 seconds left.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. It's a little cheap. It doesn't bother me that much, but I think upon multiple watches, you kind of pick up on that more.
I like that better than other shows that are just like, this is the most OP thing ever, and it just completely destroys everything, and just has like no limitations. Yeah. I like at least a cheap limitations better than like that super cheap overpowered stuff you get like in other shows.
That's true, and at least like they do give a reason for it to be able to stop fighting. Because when you do have an overpowered thing in another show, you kind of start to wonder like, why doesn't this just activate now and destroy everything? Yeah, like I think Dragon Ball is one, especially in later seasons, that gets like that, where it's like, why don't they just go Super Saiyan 4 and
exactly.
do all this or whatever?
Yeah.
But again, I don't know why we keep bringing up Dragon Ball when we talk about Evangelion. That's really not a good comparison.
No, really.
I guess it just shows we haven't watched that many anime.
I was going to talk about Gundams, and I was like, they're just overpowered and just destroy everything. I think it's a better comparison.
Gundam is a better one to compare for sure.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, I forgot. I wrote this down last week, but I forgot to talk about it. I don't think I talked about this. If I did, sorry, listeners. But in the first episode, we see a little bit of Seele.
Oh, right.
And it's just a small scene, but it's interesting to see him that early on because we don't really see much of them, I think, for a few episodes here. But what's interesting about seeing Seele now is we actually see the people, and later on that changes.
Yeah,
we just see the audio-only slams.
Yeah.
Which I've always thought, just because everybody always talks about how Evangelion ran low on budget, I always felt like they probably did that because it was cheaper to put a big black block there than to animate a person.
Right.
But I actually always liked that better.
I was just about to say that. I think that's adds a way more like mysterious level to them. Like, who are these people kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think even though it probably happened because of low budget, I think it was a really cool way to do it. I think it's really cool. I think I could be wrong, but I think in the rebuilds you don't ever see them, right? It's always just the black.
Yeah, it's always black signs the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cooler to me. Like I kind of wish that they would have always done that in the show because seeing them is kind of weird.
Right. In the rebuilds, not to go too deep in that. Do you really hear many of them talk besides the main one?
I don't think so. I don't really remember, to be honest. I don't remember either. I've watched the third rebuild pretty recently, but I haven't watched 1 and 2 in quite a while. So, because they don't say much at number 3, so nobody says much at number 3. But yeah, it's been a while since I've seen the first 2, so I don't totally remember. Go ahead.
Speaking of the 3, kind of waiting for the dub and stuff like that. You're watching. In case anybody doesn't know, you're watching the subtitled. I'm
Yes.
watching the dub.
Right.
And I'm still watching it with the subtitles on
Okay.
as well. And that brought me to something interesting. When he gets into the cockpit to fight the angel,
Mm-hmm.
there's subtitles that pop up on the screen of like as if Shinji was saying something, but in the dub he's not actually saying anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
What,
so
what'd
it's
they
almost
say?
it's like he's having an internal monologue, but it doesn't show it. It's when he says, "Why am I even piloting if my father's not here? And why am I even piloting like if they're just gonna beat me up and stuff like that?"
Oh, he doesn't say that in the dub?
And the dub one I have, he didn't say anything, but it was subtitles are across the screen. So I don't know if it was like a mess up on the one I have or
Oh, that's weird, because maybe it's just in a different episode, but when he said that in the sub, I thought I remembered him saying that at some point, just the line of, why am I piloting? But I guess he says that a lot, so I probably probably thought of it.
But
for
that was really
differentiation.
interesting. That wasn't in there in the dub one, but I saw the subtitles for it.
That is interesting. Yeah, we'll have to pay close attention to that to see if there's any other discrepancies, because that's pretty interesting. We kind of mentioned this earlier with Toji and Kinsuke, but we see a little bit of the effect of what an Evangelion fight can do to the people of the city. I think that's really interesting because I kind of forgot about that, because I mentioned in the last episode too, we see them cleaning up a lot of the fight. And these are things that I guess they set up now, but they just kind of go away, because we never, throughout the entire rest of the show, as far as I remember, we never see any other human being affected by the fights, aside from the pilots and the nerve staff. Nobody on the street is ever like crushed by an angel during a fight or anything. I don't remember ever seeing that anywhere else.
Yeah.
I just think that's kind of interesting, because usually in a lot of shows like this or Japanese movies about giant things attacking cities, it's all about people getting destroyed. And even though later on we see buildings getting destroyed and stuff, we never really see just people dying.
No.
Which I guess is because in Tokyo 3 they've pretty well fortified it. But still, it's just kind of interesting. So it makes me wonder early on in the show, because last week we kind of talked about how Tokyo 3 could possibly work as far as how the buildings go up and down to protect the people. Obviously, not all the buildings go up and down or something, because Toji's sister was somehow hurt.
Oh, good point.
So I assume that she was still above ground. I guess maybe she was underground and like a shockwave hit
Maybe
from above
maybe
and
it's
knocked something on her.
that, or maybe because that attack was more of a surprise attack than they weren't prepared for it. Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know.
I'm not sure. It's just like we said last time. They just really don't explain how it works too well.
Yeah, but one thing I did catch in this episode, when the angel's coming and they start lowering all the buildings, we see above ground there's just some kind of smaller buildings, not the big skyscrapers, but like smaller shops and smaller houses. Those definitely aren't going down.
Right.
So there is obviously kind of cheaper, maybe slumish areas of Tokyo 3 that aren't the big fancy skyscrapers. So maybe she was in one of those or something.
Maybe, I bet so.
But yeah, it sucks for those people.
Yeah, and we see like, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you moved all the way to this high tech city and you're just stuck there.
Well, maybe that's why a lot of people, because they kind of make a point that a lot of people are evacuating or moving to other schools. Maybe they make that point. It's not really all that safe. But
hey,
we also,
never mind. Go ahead. I'll say this in a sec.
But we also get to kind of see the thing we talked about last time, where you have those buildings that are still kind of up there, but they send weapons and stuff like that through them.
Right. Yeah. Which seems like I don't know. Seems a lot of waste of money to build a huge building that's not real.
Exactly. Yeah.
But whatever. Well, in this one we actually even see Unit 1 gets launched up into a building and like comes out of it like a door. I don't know what that was about. But as far as the thing about people, at the scene in the school where they say, "Oh man, a lot of people are evacuating," they say that, and then the next scene is Shinji typing at his computer with everybody in the room. The room is completely full of students typing to him. Who evacuated? Because the scene before that, when they say that, the room is like dead empty. It's like Rei, Shinji, the class rep, I think, and then Toji and Kinsuke. Nobody else in the room. And then they're like, "Oh, it all evacuated." And you look at the scene and you're like, "Oh wow, I guess they did all evacuate." And then the next scene it completely contradicts itself and everybody's there.
What I'm wondering they meant to do with that episode, they didn't explain it, is because it kind of shows some like emptier rooms before then. I wonder if they're trying to say that since it was so empty, they decided to conglomerate all the classes into just one small one class.
Maybe that could be, because we don't ever see any other classes.
Exactly.
In the
Yeah.
show. This is the only classroom we ever see.
Yeah.
So that's possible. They probably should have said that if they were going to immediately contradict themselves.
I think they kind of forget to say a lot of things in this show.
That's true.
That's why there's so much mystery around it.
Yeah. But that reminds me, as far as the school scene goes, we hear the teacher talk a lot about second impacts.
Right, yeah.
And at first it's kind of like, it's in the forefront. But pretty quickly, while he's talking about it, it cuts to Shinji chatting with his classmates, which is interesting to me because this is really, until much later in the show when we find out kind of the truth about Second Impact, this is really the only time we start to set up this idea of what Second Impact was. And they cut it in half with Shinji chatting online.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think part of the thing is they're trying to, like, surprise you with how important that ends up becoming. But it's just interesting because I think... Actually, I was glad I watched that with subtitles because I wanted to read everything the teacher was saying and not have it totally muted.
That's exactly why I was the same thing, because I had the subtitles popping up and I was paying super close attention because I feel like Second Impact and all this stuff is something that kind of changes a lot between the rebuilds and that, or sometimes how they talk about it. So I was like, I want to make sure I actually get this right, like how this happens this time.
Yeah, there's definitely some confusion there, especially because a lot of people are lying and who knows what the real truth is.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting because this is really the only time we see kind of what the general public believes about Second Impact.
Right.
But that chat room scene was interesting to me too because this is Evangelion was made in like the early 90s in Japan, early mid 90s I think, and I wouldn't have thought that was like a big thing at the time.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, I don't know.
So I don't know if it was just ahead of its time because I mean I remember when I was in elementary school we weren't doing that. In high school we did have laptops, but that was in 2007 and 8. This was 1992 or 3.
Were AOL and chat room stuff like that popular during that time period?
I mean, I think that some of them existed, like because that was like the early days of the internet still. Because what did the internet come out like late 80s?
Yeah,
like 88 or something. So I think that they existed at this point, but I wouldn't think that they were given to kids at schools. Maybe they were just extrapolating.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably what they were doing. But that's just interesting because that scene is actually pretty close to what it would be like today. Because some of the other scenes, I think, with technology kind of age a bit, but that one is like spot on to how that would be handled today. Because it would have been really easy to do that scene with her passing notes to Shinji.
Yeah.
But to do it in that way is pretty interesting in the early 90s.
We're going to see other kids go in the cockpit, which is kind of interesting, I guess.
Yeah. That reminds me. Well, hang on, I'll bring that up in a minute. But yeah, the cockpit thing is interesting because we learn that other people in the cockpit can cause like neural interference or something. I don't know exactly what the term they use is, but because we see that come back when Shinji and Asuka are in the Eva together. But when they're together, I mean, maybe it's just because Asuka is bossy, but she kind of makes it seem like Shinji's like screwing her up at first.
Yeah.
But that's just one person. He's actually a pilot. But these two dudes don't screw Shinji up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a part where a nerve employee is like, "Oh no, look at the graph." But aside from that, the Eva seems to work perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So I don't really know why they bothered to explain that in the episode when it apparently had no impact.
Effect. Yeah. I think they just kind of just looked over that.
Yeah. But whatever. Let's talk about the angel fight real quick. I like how we barely talk about the angel fights. But first of all, this angel's a dick, right?
Right. Yeah. It's totally
a dick. It's definitely a dick. Crap! I looked up what the angel's name was, but I forgot it. Suchel or something. I don't know. They all sound the same. I don't know how people know all those names because they're never said in the show.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I don't know.
Maybe they're like in the manga or something. Maybe.
Maybe I read the manga, but I don't really remember it, to be honest. I remember the ending because the ending is pretty different, but a lot of it's just the same as the show, so I kind of skimmed over a lot of the smaller details.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, not the most exciting angel fight, but I guess it's not really meant to be. It kind of has a different goal to establish in everything that's going on.
This one seemed more or less about how Shinji interacts with people outside of Nerve. Kind of seemed more the basis of what this episode was.
Yeah, for sure. Rewatching this episode, was there any like big thing that you didn't pick up on the first time?
I think I paid more attention to them actually talking about Second Impact since I think the first time I watched it, I didn't really know if that was something I should pay attention to. So
yeah, it just seems like a boring school lecture.
Yeah, exactly. So I paid more attention to that.
Yeah, this episode doesn't have a lot of stuff like that. I think the first couple episodes had a lot more, and going into the next few, they'll start to have a lot more of that stuff. But yeah, this one didn't really have a lot that you'd pick up on a second watch.
Pretty straightforward stuff.
I think this episode's actually called Hedgehog's Dilemma, and they mentioned the Hedgehog's Dilemma. You ever heard of that before this show?
No. Oh, yeah, I have. Yeah.
You have?
Yeah, actually, mine was called, we talked about this, I don't know if this is actually the title, because mine starts off with Silent Phone, and then changes to something else.
Oh, okay. Well, I know they talk about the hedgehog's dilemma, but
Yeah.
that was something that they talk about in the show. Like, oh, have you ever heard the fabled story? No, what are you talking about? Maybe it's a
Nice
Japanese
thing, maybe so.
thing. I'm sure it
Because I think
probably
I have
is.
heard that before, but I think it was also in another anime thing. So that must be a
Oh,
Japanese
okay, that
thing.
makes sense. Yeah, I guess it's just some kind of psychological thing that they use to explain people. But yeah, I mean, we do learn a little bit more about Shinji's personality in this episode, which I mean, I think rewatching it, I really think that's the entire point. Well, I mean, aside, I guess what you said makes sense too about how or not Shinji, Toji and Kinse's characters kind of exist to show how the people are affected,
Right.
which is definitely part of it. But I really think the main reason they're there is just to show how normal kids interact versus how Shinji interacts. Because the pilots in the show, Rei and Asuka, they don't really act normal either. So I think really Toji and Kinsuke are the most normal kids we get in the whole show.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I think a lot of why they exist is just to show exactly how different the pilots are in comparison to other human beings.
And the effects of like doing all the stuff they have to do have on them in their social lives and stuff like that.
Yeah, and just the way they choose to deal with their problems.
Because even when Asuka goes to school, she kind of becomes sort of an outcast in a way, too.
Yeah.
And then Rei, already was an outcast. You can kind of see that in this episode.
Yeah, I always wonder why Rei's even at school.
I do too. Like, I don't get the point.
Like, why did they send her to school?
Yeah.
Because I mean, normally, I don't know if I assume this is true in Japan like it is here in the States, but I mean, you kids have to go to school.
Yeah.
Like, that's a law. But I mean, after like the apocalypse happened and you're living in that kind of society,
Dude, guys,
and you made a girl that's a clone of a mom, like, I don't know, does she need to go to school?
Dude, gotta keep up those grades.
I guess so, because doesn't in an upcoming episode doesn't Gendo talk to her about her grades or something?
I think so, yeah.
He says something like, "How's school going?" I think that happens. So yeah, I guess so. Anything else we need to talk about this episode?
No.
I don't really think there's much else. Oh, one thing. We do get back to the angel fight. We see Shinji disobey orders.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which is interesting, and
especially because the very start of the episode they talk about how he just does what he's told.
Yeah, exactly. Right away in the training session, he's very just repeating what they say, doing whatever, and they even mention, I guess he's just that kind of person that just does whatever he's told to. That's how he gets through life. And then in the end of the episode, we see that sometimes that could be different.
Yeah.
And it's really affected by kind of what he's going through and dealing with at the time. Because obviously this will come back later, but yeah, I think it's interesting this early on that we see Shinji just be like, nah, fuck the orders, and just go massacre. I guess he doesn't really massacre it, but attempt to massacre the angel. Kind of gets stopped halfway.
I think it's kind of interesting they show that he also, because he's getting his ass kicked, and then as soon as he saw the two people, like, he fights better, I guess, maybe when he's like around other people, or something, kind of like showing something like that. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like when you can actually see the people he's fighting for, maybe cares about, all of a sudden he's like doing good.
Yeah, maybe it kind of connects him back with reality.
Yeah.
Which I could see how you could be disconnected from that in a giant robot.
Yeah.
fighting a giant dick.
A big old penis.
So yeah, I guess you need to see a couple kids that beat you up to remember what real life is like.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. Again, I really like this episode. I think it's just a nice little complete episode, and we start to learn more about some of the characters. Even though the ones introduced aren't necessarily the most interesting ones in the show.
No.
I noticed a couple people. Looks like you guys might be following the podcast now. Thank you for doing that. We'd really like to hear from you guys if you have some stuff you want to say.
Or correct us on things.
Yeah, or correct us on some things or make fun of how dumb our opinions are. Whatever. But yeah, we'd like to hear, what you guys thought about the episode. I'll say if you want to comment or message us or whatever, or if you don't, that's cool too, but it'd be cool to hear from some other opinions, because this is basically a discussion and analysis podcast, really, so we'd like to get some other opinions than just ours. And I don't really know if we're ever going to have anybody else on the podcast. Who else would we even have on it? We don't know a lot of people that have watched Ava and are really super gung-ho about it. So yeah, we usually record this at the beginning of the week and release it towards the end. So if you want to email us before like Monday, Tuesday, and the podcast will come out like Thursday or Friday every week, then we should be able to get it. So as long as you leave a message or whatever before the weekend's over, we should be able read it, talk about it, whatever. But yeah, again, thanks so much for watching. Anybody that's watching, that's awesome, and we're really excited to keep going and watch more of the show.
Yep, for sure.
So I guess come back in 1 week and make sure you watch episode 4 first, and you'll be ready to go. And goodbye.
Later.